You wake up on Saturday morning, look at your calendar, and smile. You have 2 whole days off. No work, no obligations, just rest. You take this for granted. But here's what you don't know. People died, so you could have Saturday off. Factory workers fought in the streets. Strikes turned violent. Families went hungry. Politicians refused. Businessmen dug in their heels. And for decades, it looked like they would never, ever get a weekend. Today, we're uncovering why you have a weekend and why this story matters more than you think. The problem they lived with. Let's start at the beginning. Before the weekend existed, before the idea of 2 consecutive days off was even imaginable, the Western world ran on a completely different rhythm. Picture Manchester, England, year 1815. The Industrial Revolution is exploding. Factories are everywhere. They run from dawn until dark. A typical factory worker, often a woman or child, would arrive at 5 inches the morning. They'd stand at a spinning frame, repeating the same motion thousands of times. By 7 p.m., their hands were bleeding. Their eyes burned from the cotton dust. They hadn't eaten since 6 a.m. But they couldn't leave. The factory closed at 8 p.m., sometimes later. 6 days a week, 14 to 16 hours a day. The only day off was Sunday for church. One documented account from year 1824 described a girl named Margaret. She was 9 years old. She worked 15 hours a day for 6 days a week. Her legs were permanently bowed from standing. Her thumbs were worn flat from spindle work. She hadn't been to school. She couldn't read. This wasn't unusual. This was normal. The first attempts to change it. By the 1800s, something unexpected happened. Workers didn't wait for permission. They created their own unofficial weekend. It was called St. Monday, and it was genius. You see, skilled workers, blacksmiths, printers, weavers, they got paid on Saturday. So on Monday, instead of showing up to work, they just didn't. They called in sick. They said they were observing a religious holiday, even though St. Monday isn't real. Factory owners hated this. They lost a day's productivity, but they couldn't stop it. The tradition was too strong. By the 1800s, St. Monday was so common that commercial leisure businesses opened just to serve Monday visitors, theaters, music halls, taverns. Workers had created their own unofficial day off, and the economy adapted to it. But factory owners wanted to control this. They didn't want workers deciding their own schedules. So they made an offer. Give us Monday, and we'll give you Saturday afternoons off. You stay home, rest, maybe go to church. Then Monday, you come back refreshed. In year 1842, a group called the Early Closing Association formally lobbied for this. They argued that Saturday afternoons would make workers moral and respectable. Religious leaders agreed. Labor organizers saw it as a compromise. Slowly, Saturday half-holidays spread. By the late 1800s, many British factories had adopted it. But this wasn't a full weekend yet. It was Saturday afternoon and Sunday. Workers still worked Saturday mornings. The full weekend, 2 complete consecutive days off that still hadn't happened. Why the weekend almost never existed. Here's the thing. Britain had Saturday half-days, but America didn't. American factory owners were more ruthless. By the year 1900, factory work in America was hell. 16-hour days were standard. Some workers, especially in steel mills, worked long turns of 24 hours, twice a week. So they could rotate and get every other Sunday off. Imagine that. A 24-hour shift. You worked 1 whole day and night without stopping. Then you'd work day shift the next week. The constant switching between day and night destroyed your body. One researcher studying Pittsburgh steelworkers in 1910 wrote, "Adding to the evils of Sunday work is the long turn of 24 hours that comes every second week. The shift switches workers from day to night every 2 weeks. This is degrading. It affords no opportunity for rest." Workers were exhausted. Families barely saw their fathers. Accidents happened constantly because exhausted people make mistakes. But business was good, and factory owners wanted to keep it that way. The first organized push for the weekend came in the year 1920s. Henry Ford's unexpected move. Now, here's where the story shifts. Most wealthy industrialists fought against worker demands. They said shorter hours meant lower profits. Courts backed them up. Unions lost strike after strike. But Henry Ford, the car manufacturer, famous for the assembly line, did something shocking. On May 1st, 1926, Ford announced that his factories would adopt a 5-day work week, Saturday and Sunday, both days off, full stop. The business world erupted. Other manufacturers said Ford was insane. They said it would destroy the auto industry. They said workers would become lazy, alcoholic, immoral. But Ford had a different theory. Ford believed that if workers had time off, they'd spend money, they'd buy things, cars, furniture, entertainment. A 5-day weekend wasn't anti-business, it was good business. Hereafter, there will be no more work with us on Saturdays and Sundays, Ford declared. These will be free days, but the men, according to merit, will receive the same pay equivalent as for a full 6-day week. Workers would get the same pay for 5 days as they used to get for 6 days. This was revolutionary. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Workers came to Ford factories for jobs. Other manufacturers, desperate to compete for labor, began adopting 5-day weeks too. Competition drove change. The final victory. But Ford's move alone wasn't enough to make it universal. Not every manufacturer was Ford. The real victory came in year 1938 with the Fair Labor Standards Act federal law that set 40 hours as the standard work week. Anything beyond 40 hours, you got overtime pay at 1.5 times your regular rate. This wasn't charity. It was a compromise after decades of labor strikes, organizing, and political pressure. The law said, you can make workers work longer, but it'll cost you extra. Suddenly, hiring more workers became cheaper than overworking fewer workers. The 5-day week became standard. What nobody expected. The economic boom. But here's what shocked everyone. Within 5 years of the 5-day week becoming standard, the American economy didn't collapse. It exploded. In 1935, before the 5-day week was mandatory, the average American family spent roughly $400 annually on entertainment and leisure. By 1945, that number had jumped to $1,200. That's a 300% increase. Why? Because suddenly, families had time to spend money. They went to movie theaters on Saturday nights. Sunday became the day families visited restaurants. Weekend trips to beaches and parks became possible. These industries, entertainment, tourism, leisure, didn't really exist before. Or they were tiny. By 1950, the leisure industry was generating more jobs than heavy manufacturing. And here's the thing factory owners never expected. Rested workers were more productive. A worker who'd had Saturday and Sunday off came back Monday morning fresher. They made fewer mistakes. They worked safer. Accident rates in factories dropped by 23% in the first 3 years after the 5-day week was implemented. Factory owners had predicted disaster. They got efficiency and more profit. The social ripple. Families reunited. But the economic story wasn't the biggest impact. The real impact was personal. For the first time, families could actually spend time together in the daytime. Mothers could see their children awake. Fathers could take their kids to a park instead of working. Extended families could gather on weekends. This single change, 2 consecutive days off, reshaped family structure, community life, and what it meant to be human. Birth rates changed. People had time for relationships, so they had children. School systems expanded because now children were going to school and actually getting breakfast at home on weekends, so they performed better. Marriage rates stayed high because couples had time to connect. These changes echoed across generations. The paradox. Who actually won? Here's the dark side of this story, though. The workers who fought and died for weekends, the factory workers of 1900 to 1930, almost none of them lived to see the weekend as a normal thing. Most died before 1938. They sacrificed for rights they never enjoyed. But there's another, weirder paradox. The very business leaders who fought weekends the hardest, their companies eventually became the most profitable because of them. Factory owners who claimed weekends would destroy business, their factories thrived. Their grandchildren inherited massive wealth. Wealth built partially on the leisure industry that weekends created. The people who opposed this change the most vigorously directly benefited the most from it. Why this matters today. Now here's where this connects to your life right now. You get a weekend because people suffered, because people organized, because people risked getting fired, blacklisted, beaten by police. But here's what's strange. You might be losing it without noticing. The average American in 2025 checks work email on Saturdays, scrolls work Slack on Sunday, is on call even when not at work. For many people, especially professionals, the weekend is becoming a myth again. The very thing people died to achieve is slowly being taken back, not through law, but through culture and technology. When you work from home, when your phone connects you to your job 24/7, when your boss texts you Sunday morning, are you really getting a weekend? The workers in 1926 fought for something specific. 2 consecutive days where you don't have to think about work, where you're a human, not a worker. Do you have that anymore? Remember at the start, I said people died so you could have Saturday off? Now you know why. You know the Manchester factory where children's hands bled. You know about St. Monday workers creating their own unofficial break. You know Henry Ford's unexpected wisdom. You know the Fair Labor Standards Act that finally made it law. You know that your weekend, which feels like it's always existed, is actually a hard-won victory purchased with suffering and sacrifice. But here's the bigger pattern underneath this story. Progress never comes from asking nicely. It comes from people refusing to accept the unacceptable. Look at history. Every single system we now consider basic weekends, 8-hour workdays, child labor laws, workplace safety, minimum wage came because people fought for them. They didn't ask. They demanded. They organized. They risked everything. And powerful people resisted with everything they had. And somehow, we forget that. We inherit the victory without remembering the cost. Then slowly, subtly, we lose the ground our ancestors fought to gain. Your weekend is currently being taken back in slow motion, not through laws, but through culture, through expectation, through technology that makes always on possible. The question isn't, how did we get weekends? The real question is, will you actually use your weekend, or will you let it disappear? Because workers in 1926 fought for something specific. Time to be human, not just a worker. Time to rest, connect, create, love. Do you have that? Will you protect it? If you're thinking about this differently now, about how many systems you take for granted without knowing who fought for them, subscribe. The next video explores another forgotten history that directly affects your life. It's about how we got 8-hour workdays. And it's darker than you think. See you next Tuesday.